Hello, welcome to the senior thesis of Dane Rundgren. If you would be seated, please. My name is Lee Fithian, and Dane was my senior assistant this year for Greek 2. Joined with me on the panel are Mr. Priya and Mr. Miller. If you would, join me in a word of prayer. God in heaven, we thank you for this time. We thank you for Dane. We pray that you would grant him clear thoughts and clear words, and that you would grant him peace as he gives his speech and has a conversation with us. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
There's a question that's been rattling around in my head like a knot that's been tied so tightly that it tries to be unwoven. And that's the question of metacognition. The idea of who am I? What is myself? What is my being? And how does it relate to others? I would like to ask you all a question that you could possibly ponder throughout this. And that is, am I a humble person? You yourselves, are you humble people? I would like to ask that of myself. But am I a humble person? And you're likely thinking of 3 possible answers right now. 1, yes. 2, no. And 3, I have no idea. That's why I'm here. Why are you asking me? And so with this question, I would like to bring forth something that I think is very fascinating about Christianity and people as a whole. And that is that I feel that as we are moving forward throughout time, and possibly throughout all of time itself, human beings have used Christianity to accentuate the flaws of the human nature, and have tried to use this to essentially get away with being not necessarily the most godly people. This sounds very heavy, I understand, especially just to immediately start off a speech with. However, I mean this out of as much love as I can possibly include. In fact, I think that humility needs to be broken down pretty quickly. Humility, I think, is built off of love and understanding. In fact, I interviewed the head of the Art Council of Midland, Danny Holvea, and when I asked him about humility, he mentioned to me that to him, humility is understanding, 1-to-1. There is no exception. And I agree with this. I think that humility is directly related to our ability to understand and relate to other people, our ability to make connections, our ability to build bridges, our ability to find other people out there in the universe and talk to them, to find the godliness that is within them, to find the love that is within them, and to become part of that person's life. I think that's an incredibly valuable thing. But metacognition, that thing that I mentioned earlier, that idea of me, myself, I think that on the whole, metacognition needs to be broken down. Meta, as in Greek, which, for anyone that doesn't know, I senior assisted Greek 2 this year, so I've got some credibility. Meta in Greek is a preposition that is modifying cognita, which is Latin. So meta means above or beyond. So for something to be metacognitive, it would be above cognition. And cognita is mostly related to thought. And so this is thoughts of things that are above. That is what metacognition is. But that's not necessarily how I think a lot of people use it. It's not how I used it earlier. I used it to refer to I, me. And so how can thoughts of what is above relate to the idea of me, or I? Well, that comes down to the consciousness. I would like to ask all of you to think for just a second. I'm serious. Look at your hands. And think that these are my hands. This is me. I am a person. I have thoughts. There is a voice within my head. I can look around at any other person here and think that they are thinking the exact same thing as you. They also have hands. They're living their own life. They're enjoying the things that God has given them, much like how the things God has given you. Experiences, thoughts, feelings that you will never experience in your entire life, completely separate from yourself. And in order to become one with these things, in order to improve ourselves, to improve others, to try to make the world a better place, we want to try to connect these things, connect these experiences, these thoughts, these feelings. We want to be able to build a bridge. I think this bridge is built upon humility. I don't think there's any way for us to try to connect to other people without foregoing the ego and trying to humble ourselves. I think this is a reasonable statement, despite sounding a little bit out there. And I think that in order to understand it more fully, we need to understand just why it's important. Many of the people at MCA have likely read Machiavelli's The Prince. This is one of my favorite books, and a lot of people take it a lot of different ways. The first kind of assumption about it is that it is a manifesto for how to be a bad person and why it's a good thing. That doesn't sound like something you would want your child reading necessarily, but I promise you it's for a good cause. Because Machiavelli likely did not really intend for it to be an instruction manual. It was more of like a warning, of like this is how people are going to behave throughout your life, and you need to be careful of it, because that is how human nature is, the fallen nature of man. And so Machiavelli details about how to be Machiavellian, as is named after him, and how to use the upper hand, to use manipulation, lying, stealing, pride, to bring yourself up, to push other people down, to take whatever is necessary. This does not sound like something that's necessarily good, and I think all of us can agree that this is not a good way to live our life. However, why is that the case? Why do we feel that this is a problem? Why do we feel that this is bad? Well, in a 2014 study at Johns Hopkins University, and then in relation to Yale, they did two separate studies, which essentially amounted in the same data. Both involved children of the age of 1 or younger that don't have any concrete thought abilities. All of them are experiencing life mostly abstractly, so just through shapes, colors, whatever they're seeing, and then base feeling reactions from there. And so they put on a puppet show. What they ended up, a very scientific puppet show. What they ended up doing is having kind of an acted out scene with a yellow puppet, a blue puppet, and a green puppet. And so the blue one would be just kind of mean to the yellow one. And then the green one would come on and help the yellow one and be nice. And so they showed these puppets to these children and asked them to pick one. And 95%, and that's a very clean number, 95% chose the nice puppet over the mean puppet. These are 1-year-old children who don't understand like what words are, don't understand what morality is. They've never read Aristotle. These kids have no idea what these things are, and yet they experience a sense of morality. They understand what is right and what is wrong. They would rather be near the one that is nice than near the one that is mean. They did this multiple different times through multiple different studies, and the results came up relatively conclusive, that human beings do experience some sort of morality or understanding of what is right and what is wrong. This is in direct conflict to what Shakespeare would call the Machiavel, which you're noticing a pattern. It was very revolutionary at the time. This idea of being super proud and evil just for the sake of being evil and getting ahead. And so, if we experience this feeling of knowing what is wrong, then why should we do what is right? Why should we choose to be humble and not super egotistical and horrible and mean to our fellow men? And so, I would like to bring to light. Sorry, I got lost. My bad. Sorry, I would like to bring to light a story that has meant a lot to me throughout my life. That is about my grandmother, and this story is one that I've told many times because it's been kind of existent within my life, and I've been pretty open about it. This is a story about my grandmother, whose name was Margaret Watson, and she was one of the kindest people I've ever met. She never met a stranger. She lived her life being incredibly kind and caring to everyone that was around her. And she very tragically passed away right before COVID, pretty suddenly. And that's her death is not the important part, but is instead kind of a setting for what happens next, and one of the most important things that has ever been distilled upon me. And that is that after she died, I went with my mom to Subway. And so Subway was a place I used to go with my grandmother a lot, and because it's fast, sandwich, delicious. And there was a person there that worked there pretty much every time we came in, and she was very sweet, she was very nice, and my grandmother, who would, without skipping a beat, as soon as she showed up, instantly be like, "Oh my God, how are you today?" Or, "I love your hair." Or, "Oh my God, have you heard about this news?" Or, "What do you think about that? How has your day been?" Something incredibly simple, and always with a smile. She was building a relationship with this woman, someone that she didn't even know the name of, someone that she had never even met on a personal scale. And yet, whenever we went in, me and my mom solo, she noticed that my grandmother wasn't with me. And she asked, "You're not with your grandmother today? What's going on?" And so this woman had no idea what was going on. She had no idea that my grandmother had passed away. And so what's the right move? You let them know. It's like, "Hey, I'm very sorry, but my grandmother has sadly passed away." And this woman who did not know my family, did not know our names, we did not know her name, no relation whatsoever, began to cry in the subway. Genuine tears. Because my grandmother had, through tiny little pieces of communication, tiny little acts of kindness, genuinely spreading love throughout the world, had built a connection with this woman so strong to bring her to tears. And I think that that is so powerful that it should be inspiring to every single one of you. It's inspiring to me. It changed how I lived my life. And sure, there were plenty of growing pains as I continued throughout that path, but that genuinely, I think, changed the course of my action. Because I feel like I've always struggled with pride, struggled with putting myself first, because of that thing I mentioned earlier, that metacognition. I'm the only one that matters, because I'm the only one I'm thinking of. When I asked you all to think of everyone else, to think of every other person who's been living their life and experiencing feelings and thoughts and actions, you've likely been projecting your own life and your own thoughts and actions upon them, because we truly can't understand other people. But we can try. And through humility, we can try to build that bridge and build that connection and become one as people and to try to become one under God. When Christ died upon the cross, he was not thinking about, "Oh man, this is so painful, darn, I really don't like this at all." He was thinking about what he was doing for the entire world, of all people, saving people's souls, sacrificing himself in the name of all that is good. And I'm not saying that I've gone through any major sort of sacrifices in my life, but there has been something similar that I've thought of. And that is that for the past 5.5 months, going on 6, I've been working in a restaurant called Pachuco's. It is downtown. It's a wonderful restaurant. I recommend it to everyone. I'm being paid to say this. And the people there are very mean. Not to the customers, but to everyone in the kitchen. And when I started working there, I was working up front, cash register. I was just getting my job done. I wasn't very good at it, I'll admit, but I was doing it. And one day, they asked me to go work in the back, and they're like, "Hey, we need you to go do dishes." And I was like, "Okay, well, I've done dishes at Crumble. This can't be that hard." It was not great. It was very difficult. And being in the back of a kitchen with Benny and the Jets blasting at like 1,200 decibels while people are cussing at you from every single angle because you're not going fast enough is a very stressful work environment. And I thought about quitting multiple times, but I didn't. I stood through it and I thought to myself, you know what? I can get through this. I can do this. This is easy. I started to build relationships with the people that I was working with. I started to ask them more personal questions, asking them, "Hi, how are you? Like, how's your family?" It's like, "You look great today. How are you doing?" You know? And I began to build a relationship with these people, something that I think has been very useful because simply put, these are people that I now know. I understand more thoroughly. People that I've gotten closer to. And I understand now what the boss's intentions were when he put me on the dish pit, which, man, I was pretty mad for a while. I was like, I have no idea why this is happening and I hate it. Which is that he felt pretty cleanly that I was not working hard enough. And I think that's a fair assessment. I was not working hard enough. That's completely fine. I was kind of skating by. I was not really ready for what that kind of work environment was. And he was like, "We're going to throw you straight into the fire." And I went into it. I went into it pretty headstrong, but with a lot of hesitations. And I was pretty upset. And eventually I figured out that one thing that I didn't do, which is what I think got me through it all, was complain. And complaining is something that's very important in this story. Because complaining, I think, is a representation of the ego outweighing your duty. The self outweighing what you are put here to do. I was put at the dish pit to do dishes. Complaining is me putting my ego over the task of doing dishes. I've seen many people that I've worked with who are chronic complainers. And they are a pain to be near. Because all they really think about is themselves at the end of the day. And so, while I'm working, I like to think that really I'm just getting it done. It's the job I've got to do. You have to get what you're doing done. You have to go through it without complaining, because Atlas shrugs. You have to be able to look at the work in front of you and put down your ego, be humble, pick up your load, and work. No complaints, no kvetching, no crying, no nothing. You've got to get it done. And I understand I'm not working in the oil field. I'm not working in the military. But I feel like from what I've learned at this restaurant, I could go into the oil field or military, and I could apply these same values, maybe with a little more work, apply these same values to that and continue being as good of a worker as I possibly can. But back to how we connect with people. I think that these people that I've worked with, these people that I've spent pretty much every waking hour outside of school nearby, have kind of imparted something upon me as I've worked with them. And that is that no matter what, human beings have flaws, and they will always have something that is positive underneath those flaws, something that you can connect to. Every single person, no matter what, I think has something you can connect to. They can seem like the worst person you've ever met who has no place in anything you're doing anywhere near you, and yet you can connect with them. They understand what's right. They understand what's wrong. They understand what they're doing is right and wrong. You can let them know, and they may be upset about it, but you can start to build that connection. And so, as I finish this up, I would like to encourage each and every one of you to be like my grandmother, to be like how I want to be like how I encourage you all to want to be, which is humble, to have the ability to connect with any person you meet, to have the ability to try to talk to these people and to understand them. Because like I mentioned earlier, humility is understanding. Thank you. I'm feeling great.
Oh, I undid it. Apologies. Feeling great. Good. Okay, first question. What is that?
It's a Kool-Aid packet that I'm trying to open.
But hold on, I don't know if everybody saw. Where did that come from?
Huh?
Yeah, okay.
It's a big picture. Like,
these are coming from underneath his shirt collar.
yeah. I can't really... Can you open that?
I want to say that I'm surprised, but I'm not. This makes a lot of sense.
Did you get it? I'm going to get this tape off me. This is really tight. Sorry. Like, to you too. Like, thanks. I gotta make sure it's like really well stirred. Hold on.
There are people crying now.
That's not for the reason they were expecting.
Well, it might be the second time they're crying.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So back to my original first question.
Yeah.
What will you be doing after you leave MCA?
Well, I'm planning on going to University of North Texas. From there, I'm hoping to study graphic design. It'll be a pre-major program for the first year, so it'll be a competitive entry, about 20% entry. I'm hoping to put in the work and get it done.
Very good. Why are you choosing UNT and graphic design?
I was stuck. So I knew graphic design because I've always been a very artistic person, and I do care a lot about creativity and wanting to be artistic. However, I also want to put food on the table, and those are mutually exclusive. And so this is the best of both worlds. I chose UNT because I was tied between UNT and Texas Tech, and sadly, Texas Tech just does not have the facilities. Also, UNT gave me an extra $1,000 in scholarship money. So it's like, I'm going to rather do that one. Like, that one's better.
Excellent. Well, I personally am quite excited to see what things you end up producing. You have consistently come to my office with another creation, one after the other, and I appreciate your talent. You do a good job of expressing emotions, thoughts. So that's been a joy this semester. Your speech was quite a bit different than your paper.
It was.
And
I didn't want to let you know what was going on.
So again,
this is a battle of wits that I'm winning.
Yeah. I mean, you did warn me earlier today, effectively, that this is what was going to happen. I think you're winning. So it's time to come back.
I've already disoriented you with the picture. You're already not ready. It's
True.
pink now.
Can one recover from disorientation? That's a new question. Where do I want to go? So, I'm so close. I am genuinely like.
It works.
Okay, here's a where did connection come from? Why is that a thing?
What do you mean?
Why do humans need to interact? Why can't we just be independent agents?
I feel like human beings are not necessarily 100% inclined to be together. I think there are definitely some people out there who do work best as kind of like lone wolves. And there are a lot of different paths I could take with this. I could take the economic perspective of it, which is like the diversification of resources, and the idea that having a bunch of different people all working separately but together encourages growth. Also, the idea that just human inclination towards reproduction of that's part of being alive is seeking out other human beings. You could also take it from a religious aspect of the idea that human beings are naturally going to seek out other aspects of God in order to try to feel more complete as a natural compulsion. Hence, the God-shaped hole, which I believe is C.S. Lewis. So, take your pick.
Sure. So, which one of those do you think explains it best?
I don't know about best.
Okay.
For me personally, because I think a lot of them are kind of on the same playing field, but I know each one will probably resonate with a different person differently.
But what about you?
But about me, I mean, probably a weird mix of the economic one and the religious one, which money and God don't really mix, or they shouldn't mix. But I mean,
why not?
Well, I mean, you get to the point that you've got greed within a papal institution that can start to cause corruption, because I think Christ said it best when he condemned the tax collector and the rich man. I mean, I don't think wealth and religion go hand in hand. Am I talking too quietly?
No, I am curious how to respond to that. Where does wealth come from?
The institution that we've built. I mean, for people within America, it's the capitalist kind of circle. About the distribution of wealth comes from kind of the diversification of resources. And so if I'm producing, I don't know, let's say I'm producing pink lemonade, and you want to buy pink lemonade, I sell you pink lemonade, you give me money. And then you go off, and with that energy that you have gained from drinking said pink lemonade, you produce something else that someone else will buy with their money. And so with a steady, continuous flow, people then gain wealth within that.
So that's outside the realm of God?
I believe that the human desire for wealth is outside of the realm of God.
So he can't deal with that?
I don't think so. I mean, God can deal with whatever he wants, but I don't think it is within what God wants for human beings.
Okay, tell me more about that.
What God wants for human beings?
In regards to wealth, yeah.
I think God wants spiritual connection more than anything else.
So wealth is not an avenue for spiritual connection?
I think that money is a tool, and when it's being wasted and hoarded, it's not being used to its fullest potential. And I think once it is wasted, it's not It's not that it doesn't exist, because if it didn't exist, that means that neither person would have it. It's instead being withheld from the system altogether. I'm not trying to imply that like we should kill all the billionaires, but I mean,
I wasn't going there.
I hope not. I worry. But I think that it really does. It comes back to the idea that I don't think having a relationship with God necessarily requires you to have abundant wealth.
I agree with that. I guess I'm curious, what does the pursuit of wealth do to the soul?
If you put wealth over all things, you have to ask yourself, why are you pursuing wealth?
I'm good with that thought.
And
Okay.
if you're pursuing wealth for personal gain and personal security, then essentially you're putting yourself over all things. And that comes back to the ego argument.
I like that. Thank you for pulling that back.
Sorry.
No, that was good. I appreciate that. Okay, I'm going to pass the mic.
I'm going to try to ask you something that you have to think about for a little bit so you can drink.
Yeah, I need
Because
to
you need to
get
get to the
that.
pink, right? So I've been sitting here listening and emptying my cup so I could partake of the pink lemonade. First time user here at the table. So. Well, yeah, so no notes up there.
No.
Did you know what you were going to say when you went up there?
I
I'm
have
just
like
curious.
a list of bullet points that are in my head. I thought about writing them on my hand. And then I thought that while I'm sitting up here and like doing this the whole time, everyone's going to see the black ink like smudge all over my arms. And so I didn't want to do that. But I was caught in between like, do I go out there with this like paper that I'm probably not going to reference at all? Or do I just like do it how I know it? And like, I think I understood what I wanted to have said enough that I could go up there and say it.
Well, I enjoyed listening to you and watching you kind of be unencumbered by
Thank you.
sticking to a script like most of us do, myself included. So, yeah, I commend you for that. So, I didn't catch your grandmother's name as you were telling that story.
Sorry, I probably like broke up a little bit.
No, it's fine.
It was Margaret Ann Watson.
Okay. So, as I heard, this is just one snippet into her life. As I heard you describe her interactions with the lady at Subway, it sounded to me like you could describe that by several different virtues. You picked humility because it fits nicely into your thesis, but it more sounded like she was just being friendly. Like, do you
fair.
think friendly and like friendliness and humility are the same?
I think this may be related to a little bit of like the lost in translation kind of thing. That like knowing my grandmother as personally as I did, you could kind of tell that like to her it wasn't just being friendly. To her it really was like, I've never met a stranger, come talk to me. Like let's have a chat. Like she genuinely sought out human connection to the point that like I'm pretty sure she was friends with like a Subway employee, a McDonald's employee. I think she knew someone at Market Street. There was just a lot. Like she knew so many people in town just because she was very like just open and like kind about it. And it was always, she had like a few like go-to ones that were always really good. It was always like, just how are you doing today? Which I've always admired because the how are you doing today just catches people off guard so much. Like if I could, I would encourage everyone to like try that like at least once. Like if there's like an awkward pause in the middle of like your transaction, ask them like, how are you doing today? Because you will notice a visible change in people's demeanor, especially if they're working in a crummy like 9-to-5 minimum wage job. Like that simple question can like change their entire day.
Have you been to other orals today? I forget.
I have.
Whose were you on earlier? Oh, yeah. So were you at Leslie's?
I was at Leslie's and Diana's.
So I guess he passed the test because in his nervousness, that was his
Yeah,
question for
exactly.
Leslie is, how are you doing today? So, yeah. So I don't remember reading in here or hearing you say, but like, what's your definition of what humility is?
So I'll break it down with some Greek. Shout out to that guy. So I think humility is kind of two parts, kind of meshing together. So one of them is love, I would think, and then the other one is kind of, like I mentioned earlier, sort of connection in a way. And so you have to have love and a connection in order to understand something. And so if you love what you do and you connect with what you do and you're like actively seeking it out, then you're going to understand it better. And in this case, when it comes to people, I would like to bring up some Greek, which is that love-wise, human beings who speak English kind of refer to love as like one overarching thing when there's a lot of different types of love. And whereas in Greek, they've got 4 different kinds. So there's...
You don't have to unpack them all. I mean, you can
Okay, but the good one is agape. That's like the sacrificial, like unconditional, just appreciation for the beautiful kind of things.
So, I mean, it sounds to me like then maybe love might be more fundamental than humility, but it kind of seems like in your argument, humility is the fundamental thing.
But I think that humility and love are so like closely related that you can't. It's hard because I did separate humility from love, but I think that they are so closely entangled that it should at least be implied that they are both one and the same. At the very least, I think humility should come from love, and then that humility should be used for all of these things. So I understand your point.
Okay. Good. I'm not sure I understood my
No.
point. I was just trying to just dig and understand what you were trying to say. So thank
Yeah.
you. Hey, you made it to the bottom.
I did.
Great. I was waiting for you to pour.
That's good.
Okay, Dane, I want to ask you about what is it?
How early in advance did you read my paper? I just want to ask that real quick.
I started at 3 today,
Okay.
and that was a little ahead of what I usually do.
Yeah,
It was short.
it was.
Yeah.
I cut out a lot.
So in this experiment that they did with the children, the puppets, right?
Yep.
What did that prove?
I personally would think that it proves, or at least implies, I'm not sure it necessarily proves, because
Yeah.
one piece of evidence I don't think can fully prove something. I think it implies that human beings have an innate sense of morality from the very beginning,
Okay.
or at least a sense of right and wrong.
Yeah. So do you think they have an innate sense of observing good reality or an innate sense to do good reality themselves?
Possibly more just like identifying, I think. Like
Yeah.
you're saying, observing, at the very minimum. Not necessarily that human beings are naturally inclined to only do good things, because I don't think that's true.
Yeah.
I think that because of the fallen nature of man, human beings are inclined to do just whatever is beneficial to themselves.
Yeah, so how bad do you think this ego or self is deceived? In other words, you have these kids, they're looking at these puppets, they see the bully,
Yeah.
right? Just like we all want justice for everybody else, but we want mercy for ourselves, right? And so as a kid, I can look at that and go, you're wrong. But then when they turn it on me and go, are you going to actually not bully?
Yeah.
We pretty much bully, right? So maybe you could talk about that and what humility has to do in that role of being able to see, for your ego not to be deceived anymore. Where does humility come and play personally as you were growing in this area, or you came to this point where you thought humility was so important?
Are you asking like when I got to that point, or like what influenced me?
Yeah, either you personally or somebody else. Like when would this child that's one
Yeah.
go, yeah, that's a bad thing to do? But when would they go, I shouldn't do that?
I think it's a really good question, and I think that may possibly come into kind of like the parenting aspect of it a little bit, maybe. The idea that I think growing up, my parents were always pretty cut and dry on like this is what you do, this is what you don't do.
Yeah.
And so I think growing up in that kind of like cut and dry, right and wrong situation, it did kind of, like you're saying, I think it did start to inspire some of that justice for others, mercy for myself, because that doesn't necessarily, that doesn't inspire humility, that just inspires like an overarching law, you know?
Yeah.
But I would say that humility has to come from an individual person who's within that law. that you've got to be able to not just uphold the law because it is the law, but uphold the law because that's what's right to do. And I'll be honest, I don't fully know when any individual person would have that moment of just like, oh, well, I understand that this is where my entire life's path should go. You know, I know what mine was. That was that situation at Subway, which that's really weird to say. But
Well, let me ask this. So when you're washing dishes there in the back, did humility take place?
I think so.
And so James is right. And, perseverance, then we humble ourselves before the Lord, and then we can see truth from that. So this ego maybe can see truth when we become humble. Let me ask you a little bit more about Brothers K. I want to know more about that. And I want to spoil it for everybody out there. So I'd heard so much about this book that I decided to read it this fall. So I read it. And I got done, and I'm like, that wasn't that good.
What? You don't like Russian theological novels about murder.
Mr. Schumer and I had a good conversation about it, and it's like the side conversations or the dialogues with the characters were unbelievable. But the overall plot was kind of like, you get to the end and you're like, well, I kind of saw that coming.
Well, it was supposed to be a trilogy.
Yeah, that's what he said to me. That's what Mr. Schumann said. So you answered well.
Thank you.
But in your paper you talk about I got to look for it because you don't have any page numbers on your paper or anything, and it's printed on two sides, and so I can't ever keep up with it. So
and yet again, they remain confused.
Let me read it, because even though you have this photo something memory. Written in Karamazov, this illustration is used to represent the idea that mankind's soul is being ripped in two opposite directions constantly. In one direction lies beauty, goodness, and divinity. In the other direction lies degradation and misery. Read by most students their senior year, this illustration outlines the struggles that the human soul possesses. Can you give me, an example in the book of how it shows the degradation, the pursuit of the soul, or the struggle of the soul?
Well, I think he's probably my favorite character in the book, but I think Ivan probably.
Oh gosh.
I know.
Alyosha.
No.
What?
No. Anyway, Ivan. He's for anyone that doesn't know, Ivan starts out as like this cynical atheist who's kind of living his whole life very self-focused, and it's weird though because he's like an atheist, but he very desperately wants there to be like something out there. Like it's an important part of his character, and so he gets to the point in his life that he has a conversation about the true nature of evil. And for anyone that went to the teacher-parent enrichment night for seniors, they will have read that in Brothers Karamazov, it talks about like the problem of evil. And so Ivan, of course, proposes like, well, there can't be anything good in the world because children with cancer or something along those lines. And so I'm kind of partially getting this from Mr. Acuff, but also it was a conclusion that I had thought of, but it was really half-baked. And so I'd like to kind of give him a shout-out before I mention this, which is that if the idea of evil existing is truly what is stopping you from believing in a higher power, then you have to admit that there is evil in the first place, that there must be evil. Evil has to exist. And if evil does exist, then there has to be some kind of good in relevance to it. Like for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. For every positive, there is a negative. Like for every bit of evil, there must be a bit of good. And I think that does lend itself towards the idea of that morality from earlier, that there is a right and wrong, there is a good and bad. And I think that kind of positive and negative infinity tends to lend itself a bit more to just how, pardon my like strictness, but just how dumb of an argument that is.
Yeah.
Like I understand if that's how you've been living your life and that's how you believe it. That's a hard thing to like get out of. But I don't think there's any validity to that argument. Sorry, I got a little sidetracked.
So what about what's the father's name in there?
Not
the
Fjodor.
father, but the priest. Zosima?
Father Zosima.
Yeah. What do you think about him?
I think he is a very interesting character. I didn't take the most away from him, but I thought he has a very interesting story because he ends up, if I remember correctly, I don't remember how he dies. I didn't really pay too much attention to him, I'll be honest, but
it's all right.
He does bring up multiple good points about just like the existence of morality and about how like there are good things about people and there is good to hold on to with people. If I remember correctly, he's the one that brings up the story of the I don't remember what it's called, like the bishop or something, archbishop who gets visited by like the second coming of Christ, and they're like, we don't want you.
Yeah.
And they're like, we don't want you here. And Christ is like, what do you mean you don't want me here? It's the second coming. And he's like, we got a pretty good deal, man.
You're messing up our thing.
Yeah. And so, but I think he does get used a lot to kind of clarify some things about what is good about bad and what is bad about good. I mean, and there's plenty of it.
Okay, I'm curious. You do, I would say, a prodigious amount of artwork, and you've explored many different styles and facets of it.
Thank you.
What consistently within art humbles you?
I think so. This is kind of a multifaceted one. Are you ready?
Maybe.
Yeah.
You've proven that
you're never
I
ready.
might not
You're
be.
never prepared. I think number one is learning this recently, Instagram. Like, I got Instagram so I could put, like, kind of just compile stuff in a place without, like, and if other people see it, other people see it. And then I started using it more just, like, to see what other people were doing and, like, follow, like, amazing artists that I really love. And it's been incredibly inspiring to see people that are better than me. Like, that's something I've kind of held on to for a pretty long time, is that when I see people that are, like, above me in skill level, it is this moment of just, like, I need to get there. Like, I can get there. Because if that person did it, I can do it. And, like, I believe in myself to the point that I can get there. I think the other aspect of that is just from, like, a sheer passion perspective. That, like, I'm gonna kind of, like, give a little shout-out to Skylar's thesis, which is that kind of when it comes to being passionate about something, that's the most important aspect that is related to being successful in that thing, in my opinion. It doesn't matter about talent. Mr. Patterson actually helped me clarify it, that it was talent beats hard work, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard, which that like rang in my head for a few days. It was like, that's incredible. And I think that I have been given like a serious talent for some of that stuff, to sound not as humble as I should. But it's seeing people who show a better mastery of that craft and people who are much more willing to kind of bestow their knowledge about those things to others that is very inspiring. And before you go, I would like to, that guy right there is the one that taught me how to paint. So he's really good.
Thank you. That's fun to see some of your guidance outside of this place. Okay, I want to ask one more off topic. How serious are you going to try to do graphic design for Wizards of the Coast? Or now Hasbro?
Oh yeah, Magic the Gathering. Okay, so it has been like a semi dream of mine since I started playing that stupid game, and I really want to have like something I've painted and made like on one of their cards, because that's why I got into it, because the art is so cool. And it's like dragons and wizards and like angels with swords, and it's so cool. I really wanted to have like my own art on that, because I think that, like I was saying earlier, like seeing things that are like better than what I can do inspires me to like push myself to that level. And with that kind of desire to do that, I think comes also a little bit of just like being upset with where that game's kind of like going into the dirt, because they're like just printing it for money, and I'm like, I'm a little mad about it. So that may never happen, but I really want it to happen, because then I'll send like artist proofs, because all the artists get like blank ones that they get to like sign and distribute. I want to send one to Mr. Custer, because like he asked for one, and so like there you go.
Okay.
Sorry. You're not. Is that it? I want a Fithian question.
Okay. You wrote in your paper, we need freedom from captivity. Why is selfishness a form of captivity?
I think selfishness, similar to being caught up in your own ego, is like putting on blinders a little bit and like keeping yourself in the dark. And so, to quote Aristotle and whatnot, I think that with the cave, you've got the prisoner who's stuck in the bottom of the cave. In this case, it's selfishness. Is that Plato? My bad. I didn't read it. That's a joke. That's a joke. And so the prisoner's stuck in the bottom of the cave, and he's like, that's his entire world. And if you interpret that as selfishness, and that like all he can see is what's right in front of him, he's not really paying attention to the bigger picture. And then when he's pulled out of the cave and he sees like the light and the whole world, suddenly in that moment, like it's painful to him, because it is painful if you've lived a very like selfish life to have to try to realize like, oh, I have to like put everything else before me, you know, like that's difficult. But it is fulfilling in the long run because you have that knowledge now.
So, okay. So then freedom was the goal. Well, why is freedom worthwhile? Like, why?
That's an interesting question. I think it really comes down to the idea that, can captivity really be helpful to you? Is captivity really able to allow you to be the person that you like are destined to be, or you're supposed to be?
Where does the person you're destined to be, like, where does that, like, how do you know there's a destiny for a person?
I don't think you can know there's a destiny for a person, but maybe just from personal experience, and I think I'm projecting a little bit, is that I think I've known for a really long time that like art is that important to me, and it's something that, like, I need to pursue. That like that will not stop, and if I continue with art, I feel that that is where I can find at least some fulfillment of purpose. Maybe.
Okay. I'm going to ask another question.
Oh, I was going to
about that.
Okay.
Sorry. I don't wish this upon you, but what happens when your hands are injured or you get arthritis and you can no longer do this thing that is?
I'll hold the brush in my mouth and paint with my teeth.
Right. And I'm really good with that answer. But when the day comes when you generating art is not an option, what will that do to your soul?
I think there is a time limit on all of those things. And of course, it should be noted that I'm not saying that I'm going to put art like above all other things or above health or something like that. But instead that, like, because art is so important to me, and that is what I feel like, in a way, God has kind of given me that sort of inclination and that ability, and to just waste that feels like just kind of damaging to the soul. And so using it to its very bitter end is, I feel like, more fulfilling than just like wasting it. But I understand where you're coming from.
So here's another way to say what I'm asking. What if God leads you away from art, having given you a gift in art?
Do you mean like I get in a car accident or something? Like,
no, like, okay, I graduated UNT, I have this degree, and life circumstances have led me to not doing art. Like, I can't even use the degree that I worked on.
Yeah. I think that I would probably find a way to just like deal with what I'm working on. Because I understand, it's like the dishwashing thing. I don't like washing dishes. I don't want to wash dishes for the rest of my life. I get paid really well to wash dishes. I don't want to keep washing dishes for the rest of my life. And while I do take like a great amount of satisfaction in, like, at the end of the day, I've gotten it all done. I haven't complained. Like, life is good. I think that if it was a situation where it's like, let's say I become an accountant or something happens and I become an accountant. It's like I sit in front of a computer all day and I tick tack math, and
Very accurate, by the way.
Yeah, I think I would treat that like I treat washing dishes. This is something that's got to get done. This is the boulder that I must push up the hill, and if it gets to the top and it falls back down, I'll push it back up again. And I think that even if it does turn into a situation where that's what I'm doing and that's where my life is gone, I think I will always have that kind of artistic aspect to it, or I'll try to add that in. I know pretty much everyone I've ever had class with has noticed that I'm like pretty much perpetually doodling. And that is like a never-ending action. I'm still listening, but it's like working on something, drawing something. And I think that would probably be like what would happen in that situation. If I truly had no time for art, I would find a way to make time. Like, it's that important to me.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks. Sorry. I was went for a rant there.
So we're nearing the end, so I'm sure you would have a lot more to say, but be humble, kind of talked about that, work hard, don't complain. Those are some of the things that I took away from your impassioned speech. How do you think Dane Rundgren has done at the work hard, don't complain during life at MCA?
So I think it started out pretty poorly, just straightforward. Like 7th grade MCA is baby mode, really. They don't tell you about what 8th grade's going to be like. And then you go into 8th grade and you're like, oh God, what is going on? Everything's falling apart.
They make you read Aristotle's Republic.
Yeah. I wouldn't know. And then you get into 9th grade. And then in 9th grade, COVID and everything happened. So I think it did kind of have that steady ramp up. And then junior year was the hardest year I've ever gone through. And I will not name names as to whose fault that is, but it's me. And so I really did it to myself. I can admit that it was before I was working at this restaurant. I think that genuinely the 6 months I've been working there, it has taught me that like these things that I thought I knew about, like, oh, always work hard, yeah. Or like, keep chipping away, you know? Like, I thought I knew that. I did not know that. I did not know what those things were. I could say the little phrases. I could, like, bounce off dogma, but it's nothing. Like, it's meaningless to me. And then going through that experience kind of taught me more about what that actually means. I'm not saying that I was, like, lazy necessarily, but I think that it was at that point where the only thing that mattered to me was what was interesting to me, or what I felt like I was like immediately benefiting from. So in the case of chemistry, I struggled a lot with chemistry. I got some really mediocre help from Cameron. And then that kind of helped me like move forward. But I think in geometry, it was kind of the opposite problem, where it's like I didn't want to ask for help because not like it wasn't interesting to me, but more like I felt that like being talented at something, because I do think I had like at least some skill with just the way that my brain thinks worked with that, but I didn't want to try. I didn't want to put in the effort and like memorize something. I didn't want to learn that because I'm like, I'm not good at memorizing. Like, ugh, this is annoying. And I think that was a really like not good way to look at things. And I've genuinely gone through a lot of change about how I look at stuff like that because of where I'm working.
So I'm going to ask one more question, but my challenge for you is to try to answer this one briefly. You're a good storyteller, but I want to see if Mr. Miller wants to ask you something. You said working at this new place, you thought you knew things, but you realized that you didn't know those things. I really think that's kind of what the humbling process is like, and I'm wondering if you can learn to be humble without falling on your face. If I can learn to be humble without actually like realizing that I'm not enough.
This is really hard.
Can I just like read about it in a book?
It's hard to answer quickly.
Briefly.
Yeah. I think yes, you can learn from experience, you can learn from identification, but I don't think anything is a better teacher than experience. Thank you.
So Dane, I didn't ever have you in class.
That's a tragedy.
I know. But as I look around here, I had Evan Lopez, and I'm just glad I didn't have you and Evan in the same class.
Yeah.
And, I'm thankful that you overcame Cameron's help in chemistry and made it through.
It was rough, man.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I want to say the other day we ordered pizza from Luigi's, and we were going down there to get pizza, and we got down there downtown about 30 minutes before. And I'd heard about Pachuco's, and I'm like, well, we ought to just go in there and get an appetizer just to see what it's like, see if we want to come back. And we walk in, and Dane's like, Mr. Miller! And
that's what I was doing.
Over the top, just like Dane does, and it was awesome. And you made me feel very welcome. And I was very excited walking in there and seeing you. And you had told me you were working there, but I'd forgotten.
That's fair.
And just keep doing that.
Thank you.
Keep doing that. I don't really have any other questions about the paper.
Okay.
So I think we can move on. You got a question for us?
I do. Oh.
You've got a microphone.
Yeah, I was going to reach for that one. So this is okay. So it's kind of free form. So answer however you want. But from each of you, I need one piece of just some creative work, be it music, art, movies, whatever. I don't care. Something that affected you genuinely, that brings you either comfort or sometimes discomfort. I think sometimes art can bring discomfort, and that's a good thing. Something like that has genuinely affected you, and please make them good. Good answers.
This is something that comes to mind. I don't know if you'll be satisfied with this answer or not, but I am not an appreciator of the visual arts, and I wish that I was. I'm an appreciator of you, and I like when you come into my office and say, hey, look what I made.
Thanks.
And so probably if I felt a connection with the artist himself or herself, that would help me. And so that has helped me as I have studied your art. But I do connect with stories, and so I can think of a lot of stories that match that description. I just grew up reading, and I think that counts as a valid art form.
Would Interstellar be one of them?
Yeah, I mean, I could tell you some things that I love about Interstellar, but I'll wait because there's people in the audience that we're finishing it in astronomy.
We don't have 2 hours.
I don't want to spoil it for the people who haven't watched the end. Yeah, so. But the story that comes to mind that does all those things, that hits me and makes me sad and makes me happy, is the story of Les Mis. And I love the themes of justice and mercy in there. And we were talking about Brothers K, and I didn't actually appreciate it much when I read it either. I read it alone and didn't get to connect with people about it, and so I didn't get to talk with Mr. Schumann afterward. But I think maybe one reason why you don't connect with Alyosha, or a lot of people don't, is because his character seems too fake. It's hard to make a believable good person. It's actually really easy to make a believable villain, because I think we can kind of see that the ego is pretty strong and powerful. But just the ways that Valjean lives like he's been forgiven much, and so he loves much, and so that's the first book that I remember reading and weeping when I got to the end. So that's my answer to that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Man, there's a lot like that, and it's pretty much any redemptive, crazy lot of grace at the end story makes me weep, makes me cry. And but I am like you in the sense of when I was, I don't know, I can't remember how old, as young as I can remember, I had a record player by my bed, and I would go to bed listening to music. It didn't matter what it was, and it would just be playing. And then you'd wake up at 1 a.m. and be just sitting there, ting, 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 and that's the needle hitting the end because it hadn't stopped. sang at my first funeral when I was like 7th grade, had a friend die. Sang at probably 10 funerals through my high school years. Sang all over and just love it. I love it. I'm walking around here singing a song all the time. I'm humming a tune in my head all the time. It's something that I don't think, maybe someday if I lose my mind, I have Alzheimer's or something like that, and I can't do that. But it's so much a part of me, like when you were describing what art is for you and drawing, that I can't imagine life without. I think like in music, and that's something I think that the way God's made me and the way that God's made you, and as you had everybody look down at their hands, I thought, well, when I look at my hands, I think of something. But everybody else looks at their hands and thinks of something too. And I look at my hands and think of my dad. And that's the first thing I think about, because I just remember my dad's hands, and he worked all the time. And so everybody out there's got something that it's almost like a little a sieve that everything goes through, how we think and how we do things, kind of like what Cameron was talking about in his oral, how we process and how we go about that. And some of it's can be real comforting, and that's what music's been for me. It's something that the comforting part is it connects me with people, and that's what I do with other people, and that's when I find a lot of joy, and so music's the thing for me.
This is a really hard question for me. I didn't expect that. I've been moved by creative works, but I guess my thought on them is they are imitations, interpretations of reality. And I think where we live now is a shadow of a better reality. And that's what I really want to see. So what moves my heart is, Mr. Miller mentioned redemptive stories. Those move my heart. And why is that, I wonder? Because I think there's a bigger redemptive story going on. And I don't want to give you a Sunday school answer. This is where my heart just is fascinated and broken and joyful, is knowing that all the broken things will be made unbroken at some point. And for some reason, God uses the brokenness and receives more honor and glory through that. And he is revealing, we have this word agape, and we think we've nailed it. I think that's inadequate for what he really is. And so when I see you mature, when I see your classmates mature, when I see my kids mature, when I see conflict mended, those are things that I think are the handiwork of an excellent artisan. And those things that he does are not going to perish. They will last. Every little bit of creative work that I've done, you've done, whatever, is temporal. And his work, his creativity, his artistic talent is there's not going to be an end to it. And that just blows my mind. And so I hope that's reasonably satisfying.
Yeah.
So
I just didn't want a 2-word answer.
Okay. Great. Mission accomplished. Okay. Dane, it has been a joy to have you. You would come sit in my office for hours. And it was
and I wouldn't leave you alone.
Kind of a struggle.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have it any other way. It was a moment for me to be humbled and connect, and I'm extremely thankful for the chance to to work with you, to be your friend, to have fun with you. And I look forward to doing that for a while longer.
Thank you.
So, well done.
Thank you.
Oh, I never do that.